He gave his jacket to a freezing woman at the bus stop unaware. She was a CEO who'd change his life. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. The wind cut through the city like a blade, the kind that found its way through every crack in your coat and settled in your bones. It was one of those New York nights when the air turned to ice before it hit your face, and the world seemed quieter than usual, wrapped in a shroud of falling snow. Under a flickering streetlight at a deserted bus stop, a man stood alone. Henry Miles, 46, once an engineer, now just another face the city had forgotten. His hands were stuffed into the pockets of a worn olive jacket, the kind that had seen better winters. Inside the pocket was a crumpled manila folder filled with resumes, 5 of them, all marked with polite rejections. He exhaled, watching his breath curl into the cold air, and tried to ignore the ache in his stomach. The bus was late again. Figures. He shifted from one boot to the other, feeling the wet snow seeping through the cracked soles. Then, through the blur of white, a figure appeared, a woman, running, heels clattering against the icy pavement. She must have come from one of the offices nearby, still in her business skirt and blouse, her hair wet from the snow, her arms wrapped tight around herself. She stopped under the same awning, trembling, her breath coming in shallow clouds. Henry glanced sideways, just once. She looked too polished to be out here, too fragile for this kind of cold. He looked away, not his business, but the wind picked up again, harder this time, and she flinched like she'd been struck. That was enough. Henry pulled in a deep breath and shrugged off his jacket. The air bit at his arms instantly, but he ignored it. He took one hesitant step toward her. "Ma'am," he said softly. She turned, startled. "You look like you could use this more than I can." He held out the jacket, his hands shaking from the cold. "Oh no, I couldn't," she stammered, her voice tight from the freezing air. "You'll freeze." Henry gave a faint, tired smile. "I've already lost enough today," he said. "This coat's the only thing I can still give." For a moment, she just stared at him, her eyes glistening under the streetlight. Then, slowly, she let him drape the jacket over her shoulders. The warmth startled her. It smelled faintly of soap and coffee, worn but comforting. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't mention it," he murmured, rubbing his bare arms. They stood there in silence, side by side, as the snow fell around them. The city lights blurred into halos of gold and silver. After a while, she asked, "What's your name?" "Henry," he said. "And you?" "Claire." "Nice to meet you, Claire." She smiled faintly, pulling the coat tighter. "You shouldn't have done that," Henry shrugged, his breath fogging in the air. "Probably not," he said, "but I couldn't just watch you freeze." In the distance, the low rumble of the approaching bus broke the quiet. As the headlights cut through the snow, Claire hesitated. "Do you have somewhere to go?" she asked. Henry smiled faintly. "Somewhere," he said, though the truth was the back seat of a rusted truck behind a warehouse. The bus came to a stop with a hiss. She stepped toward it, then turned back. "Here," she said, pulling a small business card from her purse, "in case you ever need anything." Henry took it, nodding, slipping it into his folder without looking. He didn't expect to use it. People said things like that all the time. Claire stepped onto the bus, the jacket still around her shoulders, and as the doors closed, her eyes met his one last time. Then she was gone, swallowed by the storm. Henry stood there for a long moment, watching the taillights fade into the snow. The cold hit him harder now, sharp and merciless. But beneath it, something else stirred, a strange warmth he couldn't explain. He looked up at the sky and whispered to no one, "Maybe tomorrow." The snow kept falling long after the bus disappeared into the white haze, and Henry stood there until the cold became too sharp to ignore. When he finally turned away, the streets were nearly empty, only the whisper of the wind following him as he walked. His boots crunched through the thin layer of ice, the sound echoing in the quiet night. He passed rows of dark storefronts and the glow of a late-night diner, the smell of coffee and fried eggs teasing his hunger, but he kept walking. Money was not for food anymore, it was for gas, enough to keep his truck warm for the night. The city clock tower struck 9 as he reached the industrial district, where the lights grew sparse and the air smelled of rust. There, behind a half-abandoned warehouse, sat his old 1998 Chevy pickup, its paint eaten by years of rain and salt. It was not much, but it was all he had left. Henry opened the door, the hinges creaking, and climbed inside. The cab was his bedroom, his kitchen, and sometimes, when he was lucky, his shelter from the cold. A stack of blankets lay on the passenger seat, a pillow tucked into the corner. From the glove box, he pulled out a small tin box, the edges dented and scratched. Inside was a faded photograph his wife Lily, smiling bright, and their son Noah, maybe 7 years old, with a missing front tooth and eyes full of mischief. Henry traced the photo with his thumb, his breath trembling in the dark. "Good night, Lily," he whispered. "Good night, Noah." The heater had died 2 winters ago, so he wrapped himself in a blanket and rubbed his hands together for warmth. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, the sound of the storm outside turned into the sound of laughter, the kind that once filled their little home before everything fell apart. He remembered the day Lily got sick. She had been teaching kindergarten then, still smiling even when she was too weak to stand. Cancer, they said. Stage 4. 9 months later, she was gone. Henry quit his engineering job to care for her, and when she passed, the bills kept coming: hospital fees, mortgage payments, debts he could not outrun. He sold the house, then the car, then the furniture, until all that remained was the truck. But he had Noah, and that was enough. For a while, he made the back seat into a spaceship, their late-night canned soup into pretend astronaut meals. Every morning, he would walk Noah to school, clean-shaven and in his best shirt, so his boy could believe things would get better. When a shelter worker once asked why he still shaved every day, Henry had smiled and said, "Because my son needs to believe I still believe too." But last fall, everything changed. A social worker decided the truck was no place for a child. She was not cruel, just doing her job, but her words still cut deep. "It is only temporary," she had said, "until things get stable." Henry had signed the papers through tears, hugged Noah tight, and promised, "I will come back for you, buddy, just for now." That promise had kept him alive ever since. But lately, even hope felt heavy. He looked down at his hands, calloused, cracked, useless. What was left of a man who had once built skyscrapers and bridges but could not even keep a roof over his son's head? The wind howled against the truck windows, shaking the frame. He pulled the blanket tighter and thought about the woman at the bus stop. Claire. The way she had looked at him, not with pity, but with something else. Gratitude, maybe. Respect. It had been a long time since anyone looked at him like that. He did not know why he gave her the coat. Maybe because she reminded him of Lily, or maybe because he needed to feel human again. He let out a slow breath and stared through the frosted glass. "Maybe tomorrow," he whispered again, softer this time. Then he closed his eyes, and the city faded into silence. Morning light crept through the cracked windshield, pale and weak against the frost that had built overnight. Henry blinked awake, his breath forming little clouds in the air, the blanket around him stiff with cold. His back ached from the seat springs, but it was nothing new. Another morning, another day to keep moving. He reached for the thermos under the seat, shook it, and sighed when he heard only air. No coffee today. Again, he stepped out into the brittle cold, stretching as the first rays of sunlight turned the warehouse walls gold. Around him, the city was already waking, delivery trucks groaning past, workers hurrying by without looking his way. To them, he was invisible, just another man who had slipped through the cracks. He brushed snow off his jacket sleeve before realizing it was not his jacket anymore. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips. He hoped the woman at the bus stop, Claire, had made it home safely. He wondered if she had found the drawing in the pocket. Maybe she had tossed it aside, or maybe she had read the words. "Noah, I love you, Daddy." Either way, it was gone now, like everything else he had given up. Henry tucked his hands into his sweater sleeves and walked toward the diner on West 43rd. The owner, Mr. Kaplan, knew him well enough to offer a hot coffee for sweeping the sidewalk. It was not charity, it was a small mercy. The kind Henry could still accept without losing face. He swept the icy slush into neat piles, each scrape of the broom cutting through the morning silence. When he was done, Mr. Kaplan handed him a steaming cup. "You look like you fought a snowplow, Henry." Henry chuckled, the warmth seeping through his fingers. "You should see the other guy. You got plans today?" Kaplan asked. "Yeah," Henry said after a pause. "Keep breathing." The old man laughed, shaking his head. "That is a start." Henry finished the coffee slowly, savoring every sip, then spent the next hours wandering from one job board to another. Construction sites were hiring, but no one wanted a man his age with a resume that had too many gaps and too few explanations. By noon, the sun had turned the snow into slush, and his boots were soaked through. He found a bench near the park and sat down, pulling out the manila folder. He stared at the papers, then folded them back without opening. What was the point? Around 2 o'clock, the sound of an engine drew his attention. A sleek black car pulled up by the curb, too new, too polished for this part of town. The window rolled down, and for a moment, Henry thought he was imagining her, the woman from the bus stop, the one with the kind eyes. Claire stepped out, her heels clicking on the wet pavement, his jacket folded neatly over her arm. She looked different in daylight, composed, confident, yet somehow softer. "Mr. Miles?" she called, her voice tentative but warm. Henry blinked, glancing around as if she might be speaking to someone else. "That is me," he said finally. She smiled. "I wanted to return this. You left something in the pocket." She handed him the folded drawing. He stared at it, his throat tightening. "I thought I lost this. I figured it meant something," she said gently. "Your son?" Henry nodded, eyes glistening. "Noah. He is 10. He is somewhere safe." Claire hesitated, watching the pain flicker across his face. "You helped me that night," she said. "I could not just walk away. Let me buy you lunch." "That is kind, but you do not have to." "I know I do not have to," she said firmly. "I want to." He studied her for a long moment before nodding. Inside the diner, she ordered tomato soup and grilled cheese for both of them. The warmth of the place wrapped around him like a blanket. For the first time in months, he felt seen. "So what do you do, Claire?" he asked between sips. She smiled faintly. "Let us just say I run a company that keeps me too busy." "You look the part," he said, smiling. "Probably makes you a good boss." She tilted her head. "Not always. Sometimes I forget what it means to be human. Then someone hands me a coat in the snow, and I remember." Henry looked down, his cheeks flushing. "It was just a coat." "No," Claire said softly. "It was everything." She reached into her purse, pulled out a card, and slid it across the table. "If you ever want work, come see me. That is not charity, it is a chance." Henry looked at the card, then at her. The name printed in gold letters almost did not look real. Clare Hart, Chief Executive Officer, Infinity Group. The same company that owned half the city skyline. His hands trembled slightly as he turned the card over. "Why me?" he asked quietly. Claire smiled. "Because you gave when you had nothing left to give. That is the kind of person I want around." Henry stared at the card for a long moment, tracing the gold letters with his thumb as if trying to make sense of them. Clare Hart, Chief Executive Officer, Infinity Group. It looked like a business card from another world, one that had never belonged to him. "I do not know what to say," he murmured. "Say you will think about it," Claire replied. "That is all." She paid the bill before he could protest, leaving a tip big enough to make the waitress blink. Then she stood, slipping into her coat his coat, and smiled softly. "Keep the drawing safe, Henry. It reminds people like me that there are still good men in this city." Before he could find the words, she was already walking away, her heels clicking against the tile floor, the door swinging shut behind her. Henry sat there for several minutes, staring at the untouched crust of his sandwich, feeling a strange warmth in his chest that was not just from the soup. When he finally looked down at the card again, he slipped it into his folder, not ready to believe it was real. But 2 days later, when the snow began to melt and the city turned to gray slush, he found himself standing in front of the glass tower of Infinity Group. He had told himself he was only going to look, to convince his imagination that it had all been a dream. But there it was, the company's name etched in silver letters across revolving glass doors that whispered open and shut with mechanical grace. He hesitated on the sidewalk, hands buried deep in his pockets. What was a man like him doing here? The reflection staring back at him from the glass was rough around the edges, with tired eyes and a 2-day beard. Still, he took a breath and stepped inside. The lobby gleamed like another universe, white marble floors, art installations spinning slowly under skylights, the faint scent of expensive perfume. Behind the reception desk, a young woman in a black suit smiled politely. "Good morning, sir. Do you have an appointment?" "I do not," Henry said, fumbling for the card. "But Miss Clare Hart, she told me to come by." The receptionist's smile faltered for a second. Then she took the card and typed quickly on her computer. Within a minute, she looked up, surprised. "Miss Hart will see you now." Henry blinked. "She will?" "Top floor, sir. Take the elevator on your left." The ride up felt endless. He watched the city shrink below him through the glass walls, his reflection ghostly against the skyline. When the doors opened, Claire was waiting by her office window, her back to him. "You came," she said without turning. "I was not sure you would." "I was not sure either," Henry admitted. She turned to face him, smiling gently. "I am glad you did. Sit, please." Her office looked like something from a magazine, modern furniture, floor-to-ceiling glass, a desk that could have paid his rent for years. Yet she seemed at ease, not distant or cold. "Henry, I meant what I said," Claire began. "You showed kindness when no one was watching. That is the kind of value this world is starving for. I want you to work with me." Henry blinked, unsure he had heard her right. "Work with you? Doing what?" "Advising us," she said simply, "helping us reconnect with the real people we build for. We are launching a foundation, Infinity Hearts. I need someone who understands what it means to lose everything and still choose kindness." Henry laughed quietly, shaking his head. "You do not need me for that. You have degrees, teams, experts. Experts do not know what it feels like to sleep in a truck," Claire said softly. "You do." Silence hung between them, heavy and honest. Henry swallowed hard. "Why are you doing this?" She met his eyes, her voice steady. "Because someone once gave me a coat when I had nothing to. I never forgot how it felt to be seen." For a long moment, Henry could not speak. Then he nodded slowly, the weight in his chest easing just enough for him to breathe again. "I do not know if I am the man you think I am," he said. Claire smiled. "Then prove me right." When he left the building that afternoon, the sun had finally broken through the clouds. For the first time in a long while, Henry did not head straight back to his truck. Instead, he stopped at a store window, catching his reflection, and thought maybe, just maybe, tomorrow could finally mean something. The following Monday, Henry returned to the Infinity Group building, this time wearing a freshly washed shirt, a borrowed tie from a shelter volunteer, and the same pair of boots that had carried him through countless hard winters. His heart pounded as he stepped through the revolving doors, but Claire's words echoed in his mind. "Then prove me right." The security guard at the entrance nodded when Henry gave his name. "Miss Hart is expecting you," he said, pressing a button that opened the turnstile. For the first time in years, Henry felt like a man with purpose. Claire greeted him warmly in the lobby, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I figured you might need this," she said. "It is strong enough to wake the dead." Henry smiled, accepting the cup. "You remembered how I take it." "Black, no sugar," she said with a grin. "Now come on, let me show you around." She led him through a series of glass corridors that overlooked the city. Every step felt surreal, the gleaming offices, the sound of keyboards clicking, the faint murmur of conversation. Claire introduced him to a few department heads, describing him not as a guest or a charity case, but as our new values consultant. The title made him blush. He shook hands awkwardly, unsure what to say. Later, in her office, Claire handed him a tablet filled with project notes. "The Foundation's goal," she explained, "is to create community programs, job training, food banks, housing assistance. We need stories that inspire people to believe again." Henry looked at the screen, scrolling through the documents. "You want me to write stories?" "Not just write," Claire said. "I want you to help shape them. You know what real struggle looks like. You can help us build something that matters." Henry hesitated. "I have never worked in an office before." "Good," Claire said simply. "That means you will not sound like one." For the next few weeks, Henry threw himself into the work. He started each day with coffee and meetings, learning how projects were funded, how volunteers were trained, and how one act of kindness could ripple through a community. His rough edges, once a burden, became his greatest strength. People listened when he spoke, because he spoke from the heart. Sometimes he still caught his reflection in the polished windows and hardly recognized the man staring back. The lines of exhaustion were still there, but behind them was something new: purpose. One afternoon, Claire invited him to join her at a meeting with the board of directors. The room was filled with executives in tailored suits, their expressions polite but skeptical. "Ladies and gentlemen," Claire began, "I want to introduce the man who reminded me what this company stands for, Henry Miles." A murmur rippled through the room. Henry cleared his throat, feeling every eye on him. "I am not here to talk about profits or reports," he said quietly. "I am here because someone gave me a chance when I had nothing left. You cannot put a price on dignity, but you can build a company that honors it." For a moment, the room was silent. Then someone clapped, and another followed. Claire smiled, pride shining in her eyes. After the meeting, as they walked toward the elevator, she said softly, You have a gift, Henry. I just told the truth, he said. That is the gift, she replied. The following day, Claire stopped by his small office with a sealed envelope. This is your first paycheck, she said, placing it on the desk. I am afraid it is not much compared to what you are worth. Henry stared at the envelope, his eyes misting. You have no idea what this means, he whispered. Actually, she said gently, I think I do. That night, instead of driving back to the warehouse, Henry checked into a modest motel near the river. The sheets were clean, the heater worked, and for the first time in months, he slept in a real bed. Before closing his eyes, he whispered to the photo of Noah he kept in his wallet, I am coming for you, buddy, just a little longer. Outside, the city lights shimmered on the water, and somewhere far above, Claire watched them from her window, wondering how a single act of kindness could change two lives at once. Weeks passed, and winter finally began to loosen its grip on the city. The snow melted into puddles that reflected streaks of morning sunlight across the sidewalks. For the first time in years, Henry felt like life was moving forward instead of standing still. He arrived at Infinity Group early each day, coffee in hand, greeting the security guard by name and exchanging jokes with the receptionist. The staff who had once looked at him with quiet curiosity now smiled and waved as he passed. Claire had given him an office beside the foundation team, and though it was small, Henry treated it like a palace. A photo of Noah sat on the desk beside a small potted plant Claire had left with a note that read, Everyone deserves something that grows. The work came naturally to him. He spoke to people in shelters, veterans' homes, and community kitchens, collecting their stories of loss and hope. Each story became a proposal, and each proposal turned into a project. The Infinity Hearts Foundation began to attract attention from the media. Headlines called it a rare example of corporate humanity, and in every interview, Claire credited Henry. He reminded us that compassion is not a strategy, she told reporters. It is a responsibility. But with success came whispers. Not everyone in the upper floors of Infinity Group approved of Claire's new direction. At board meetings, a few investors questioned the costs of the foundation. One executive named Richard Sloan, tall, silver-haired, and confident, began asking pointed questions. A consultant with no degree, no credentials, Richard said in one meeting. Are we a charity or a business? Claire met his gaze. We are both. And Henry Miles has accomplished more in 2 months than some departments do in a year. Richard's smile was cold. Just be careful, Claire. Sentiment does not pay dividends. Afterward, Claire found Henry in the lobby, talking with a group of volunteers. You look tired, she said. You should go home early. He smiled. You sound like my late wife. She used to say that too. Claire hesitated, her expression softening. You miss her? Every day, Henry said quietly. But some days, I think she would be proud of what I am doing now. She would, Claire said firmly. Later that evening, Henry stayed behind to finish a report. When he finally left, he found Claire still in her office, staring out at the skyline. The city glowed below like a constellation, and for a moment she looked almost fragile, lost in thought. You should go home too, he said gently. She turned, startled, then smiled. I was just thinking how strange life is. A few months ago, I was sitting at a bus stop in a storm, thinking my world was falling apart. Then a stranger handed me his coat. And now that stranger is giving board presentations, Henry said with a chuckle. Claire laughed softly. Life has a sense of humor. There was a pause, quiet but comfortable. The kind that comes when two people understand each other without words. Then Claire spoke again, her voice almost a whisper. Henry, can I tell you something personal? Of course, he said. She took a breath. When I said someone once gave me a coat, that was true. I was 20, broke, and sleeping in my car after my father's company went bankrupt. A woman I barely knew found me and offered a blanket, a place to stay, and a job. She saved me. I built Infinity to honor that kindness. But somewhere along the way, I forgot why I started. Henry listened quietly, his heart heavy with empathy. Then maybe, he said softly, this is your second chance to remember. Claire looked at him for a long time, then smiled. Maybe it is. As they stood there, side by side, the hum of the city below them felt less like noise and more like rhythm, a quiet reminder that life, no matter how broken, could still be mended. Henry left the office that night with a strange lightness in his chest, unaware that Richard Sloan had been watching from the shadows of the hallway. his eyes cold with calculation. The following weeks brought both progress and tension. The Infinity Hearts Foundation continued to grow, touching more lives across the city, but behind the scenes, storms were brewing. Richard Sloan, the board member who had questioned Clare's choices, began digging into Henry's past. He requested background checks, financial records, and even contacted the shelters Henry had once stayed in. He saw Henry not as an inspiration but as a threat to the company's traditional image. One gray Thursday morning, while Henry was meeting with volunteers, security approached him quietly. "Mr. Miles, Miss Hart needs to see you in her office right away." The tone made his stomach drop. When he entered Clare's office, her expression was strained. "Henry, something has happened," she said gently. "Richard brought some information to the board. He claims you falsified your work history." Henry frowned in confusion. "What? That is not true. I told you everything. I was an engineer before I lost my job." "I know," Clare said, her voice calm but heavy. "But they found a record that says your engineering license expired years before your company downsized. They are questioning your integrity." Henry's heart pounded. "It expired because I could not afford to renew it after Lily got sick. I was caring for her around the clock. I was not hiding that." Clare reached out across the desk, her eyes filled with sympathy. "I believe you, Henry, but the board does not. Richard is pushing for a vote to suspend you from the foundation until an investigation is done." Henry stepped back, his voice shaking. "After everything we have done? After everything we built?" Clare's jaw tightened. "I am fighting it, but he has allies. They think you are making the company look vulnerable." Henry swallowed hard. "So what happens now?" "Let me handle it," Clare said. "Please, do not do anything rash." But later that evening, Henry sat alone in the foundation office, staring at the city lights through the glass. The laughter from the volunteer room had faded, leaving only silence. He thought about Noah, about the promise he had made to his son that he would come back for him when he was proud again. Now, that promise felt fragile. Maybe Richard was right. Maybe a man like him did not belong in places like this. The next morning, Henry came in early, long before anyone else. He left a letter on Clare's desk, handwritten and simple. "Clare, thank you for seeing me as more than what I had become. But this place needs you, not me. Keep building the good work. Tell Noah's story when it fits, but not my name. Some stories work better from the shadows. Henry." He placed his ID badge beside the note and walked out. Downstairs, the city was still waking up. The air smelled like rain. As he stepped outside, he heard someone call his name, but he did not turn back. By the time Clare arrived an hour later and found the letter, he was already gone. Her heart sank as she read his words, each line cutting deeper than the last. She grabbed her phone and called his number, but it went straight to voicemail. "Henry, please do not do this. Come back. We will fix it." But he did not answer. That evening, Clare attended the emergency board meeting Richard had called. The conference room was tense, filled with sharp suits and colder eyes. "Henry Miles has resigned," Richard announced. "I think it is for the best." Clare stood, her voice steady. "No, Richard, it is not for the best. It is cowardice. Henry was exactly what this company needed, a reminder that we have hearts, not just numbers. And what we need," Richard said smoothly, "is stability." "No," Clare said firmly, her eyes blazing. "What we need is humanity." She turned and walked out before the vote even began. That night, she sat in her office long after everyone had left, staring at the framed photo of the foundation's first project. In the corner of the picture stood Henry, half smiling, his hands in his pockets. She whispered into the empty room, "I will find you, Henry. I promise." 2 weeks passed without a word from Henry. Clare searched everywhere she could think of: shelters, job centers, and even the diner where they first had lunch, but he had vanished as quietly as he had come into her life. Each night she replayed their last conversation in her head, wondering if there was something she could have said to make him stay. The board had moved on quickly, replacing him with a polished consultant who spoke in statistics instead of stories. The foundation continued its work, but something essential had gone missing. The volunteers noticed it first. "The new guy talks a lot," one whispered, "but he does not listen." Clare felt the truth of it every time she walked into an empty meeting room and saw Henry's chair unoccupied. One cold afternoon, while leaving the office, she passed by a community center the foundation had recently funded. A group of children were painting a mural on the wall, bright blues and yellows, spelling the words, "Kindness lives here." Among them was a familiar drawing, taped to the corner of the mural. a stick figure holding hands with a child under a smiling sun. It was Noah's drawing. Claire's heart stopped. She rushed inside and found a volunteer. "Excuse me, that drawing, where did it come from?" The young woman smiled. "A man dropped it off last week. Said he used to work with your foundation. He left before we got his name. Did he say where he was going?" "Just that he had somewhere important to be." Claire thanked her and left with the drawing in her hand, hope flickering like a match in the wind. The next morning, she drove across the city, following every lead she could gather. Finally, near the edge of town, she found a small construction site where a new shelter was being built. Among the workers was a man in a hard hat and worn boots, his shoulders broad, his movements careful and deliberate. Even from a distance, she knew it was him. Claire stepped out of her car, her breath visible in the cold air. "Henry!" she called. He turned, eyes widening in disbelief. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then he smiled faintly, lowering his tools. "I thought you would have forgotten about me by now," he said. "Not a chance," Claire replied, walking closer. "You left without saying goodbye." "I figured it was easier that way," Henry said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You did not need the trouble I brought." "Trouble?" Claire's voice softened. "You brought life back into that company, Henry. You reminded people what it means to care. Do you think I would let one man's jealousy erase that?" He looked down, his expression pained. "The board made their choice. It is better this way." "No," she said firmly. "It is not." She reached into her coat pocket and handed him an envelope. Inside was a letter with the Infinity Group seal at the top and Claire's signature at the bottom. "This is your reinstatement," she said. "I convinced the board to reopen the foundation under new management. You are part of it if you want to be." Henry stared at the paper, then at her. "Claire, you do not have to do this." "I know," she said, "but I want to." His eyes softened. "What about Richard?" Claire smiled faintly. "He resigned last week. Turns out investors do not like men who manipulate the truth." For the first time in months, Henry laughed a full, genuine sound that warmed the air between them. "You always find a way, do you not?" "Only when it matters," she said. "So, what do you say?" Henry looked around the construction site, the half-built shelter, the workers hammering in rhythm, the rising frame of something new and solid. "I say," he murmured, "let us finish what we started." Claire extended her hand and he took it, his grip firm but gentle. "One more thing," she said. "You forgot this." She handed him the drawing of Noah. Henry's eyes filled with tears. "You found it?" "No," she said softly. "It found me." He folded it carefully, slipping it into his jacket pocket like a sacred promise. For the first time in years, he felt whole again. Spring came early that year, and with it came new beginnings. The construction of the shelter finished ahead of schedule, and on opening day, the entire community gathered beneath a banner that read, "The Miles Center for Hope." Henry had tried to protest when Claire named it after him, but she had simply smiled and said, "It is not just your name, Henry. It is your story. People need to know what kindness can build." The air was warm, filled with the scent of fresh paint and the sound of laughter from children running through the halls. Henry stood near the entrance. Wearing a new suit Claire had insisted he accept, though he still kept his old boots on. They reminded him of where he had come from. Claire joined him, her eyes shining as she looked around. "You did this," she said. "No," he replied softly. "We did." Cameras flashed as reporters arrived, eager to cover the story of the former homeless man who helped rebuild his city's sense of compassion. But for Henry, the real moment was quieter. When the crowd thinned, a familiar voice called from behind him. "Daddy?" Henry turned, his heart nearly stopping. There stood Noah, taller now, holding the hand of a social worker who smiled warmly. "We got your letter," she said. "The court reviewed your case after seeing the news about the foundation. They believe you are ready." Henry knelt as Noah ran into his arms, and for a long moment, father and son just held each other, the world around them fading into silence. Claire stood a few feet away, tears in her eyes, her hand pressed to her chest. When Henry finally looked up, she smiled through the emotion. "Looks like someone is getting his family back." Henry nodded, unable to speak. Later, as the sun began to set, the three of them stood outside the shelter watching the city lights flicker on. "So what happens now?" Noah asked. Henry chuckled. Now we start over, together." Claire turned to them, her voice gentle. "I was thinking," she said, "the foundation is expanding. We will need someone to manage the new community programs. Think you can handle that, Mr. Miles?" Henry smiled. "With my partner here, I think we can handle anything, Noah grinned. Can I help too? You already did, Claire said softly. A month later, the Infinity Hearts Foundation launched a citywide initiative called One Kindness Day, inspired by Henry's story. Thousands of people participated, leaving coats, food, and letters of hope for strangers across the city. Claire and Henry stood together on stage during the announcement, cameras flashing as Claire spoke to the crowd. This all began with a single act of kindness on a snowy night, she said. A man who had nothing gave everything he had, a coat, a gesture, a moment of humanity. Today that moment has become a movement. When the applause faded, Claire turned to Henry, whispering so only he could hear. You see, it was never just about the coat. It was about what it meant. Henry nodded, his voice thick with feeling. It meant I was not invisible anymore. She smiled, reaching into her bag and pulling out something wrapped in clear glass, a frame holding the old olive jacket, preserved and displayed with a small plaque beneath it. She handed it to him and said, "It belongs here, in the heart of what we built." The plaque read, "It started with one act of kindness." The crowd cheered, and as Henry looked at Claire standing beside him, the noise faded into something peaceful. The city skyline shimmered behind them, reflecting in her eyes like 1,000 tiny stars. He whispered, "Thank you, Claire, for seeing me when no one else did." She looked at him, smiling softly. "No, Henry. Thank you for reminding me what it means to truly see." That night, as the lights of the shelter glowed against the sky, Henry tucked Noah into bed for the first time in years. He stood by the window, watching the world outside, and for the first time in a long time, the future did not look cold or uncertain. It looked like home.